Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this year's State of Europe virtual forum rather than the physical round table, and our Festival of Politics and Ideas, which is now online for this week. Those of you who joined us this morning will know that we discussed the issue of leadership, governance and trust. And for this second session, this second main session, we're talking about stepping up government and corporate leadership towards a new approach to growth. Those of you who are here this morning, welcome back. And those of you who are joining us for the first time, good to see you on Zoom. It's a very warm welcome also to our audience on live stream. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Just a few kind of tips about how we engage. Firstly, those of you who've been Zoom savvy, you'll know that you need to keep your video on, make sure you're on mute. And those of you, and when you want to raise a question or make a contribution, use your virtual hand, which you'll find on the bottom of your screen where you've got the participants. Push on that and you'll find your virtual hand. For those of you on live stream, you are not forgotten. Use our hashtag State of EU to pose your question, query or frustration, and we'll make sure we include you in this conversation. That's it for the kind of the rules of the game in terms of engagement. We have an interesting bunch of speakers for you for this conversation, but don't forget, this is not a classic conference. This is a conversation amongst those of you who are at the top end of your game in different ways, politics, in terms of politics, economics, social issues, etc. Thinkers and academics, the whole works are included in this conversation. So this is about trying to find a way that we can move things forward, move the dial on our concept of growth. And given where we find ourselves right now, in terms of the biggest economic shock the world has experienced probably since Second World War, and those of you who are here this morning will have heard me say that we're going to see the largest contraction of world output since the Second World War, and we know that debt is going to go up. So therefore, we need to change things around. I want to share a slide with you first before we go into this debate. As every year, we survey citizens across Europe, and we asked, as you can read on this slide, I hope, over 10,000 nearly 10,500 Europeans from across 11 member states about what should the EU prioritize over the next 5 years. And this is what the majority of them said in different ways. Said they wanted the EU to prioritize economic recovery. But if you look at the slide, look at that difference. Just look at that difference in terms of what we have is between 65 and 66% of citizens in Portugal, Greece and Spain, and 58 in Italy who are prioritizing this. Whereas you actually have, you might call them the frugal nations, you might call them whatever you wish, but they are clearly in a different zone in terms of economic recovery. So that sets the backdrop, if you like, of what citizens are thinking about this particular debate and this issue. To begin with, just to frame the fact that we've had the hottest summer, the hottest September on books. We know things are changing at a pace on climate change. And we know that we need to think very differently about how we do our business. Lessons from the past are not necessarily going to help us as much as we thought they would. But actually, we need to rethink some of our received learning in order to create a very different economic restructuring. The EU has set a target, if you like, of 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. To achieve this, this requires a very different way of thinking about how we do business. But most importantly, what are the trade-offs, and should there be trade-offs between the sense of emergency about jobs, but actually then transitioning to something different and better to save our planet and make sure that we are safe into the future, but also digital. So to kickstart our conversation, I want to first invite Marco Lambertini, who is the Director General of the WWF International. Marco, it's a great pleasure to have you back at one of our debates. It's very good to see you again. And I want to invite you to answer this question, which is really very much about the fact that if we think that we need to do something in the next 10 years, and that's probably being generous, that we've got 10 years left, if you like, and we need to act in earnest and with a gusto. What needs to shift now? Over to you, Marco. Tough question, I know, but you have a wide lens across the world, and you know that this issue has to be addressed in a number of ways. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I don't think it's such a tough question, to be frank, because because clearly we're living times which are times of transition already. We have embarked already in a transition in our society, and as any transition, well-managed transition, what we need to do is to be, first of all, clear on the problem statement, why we need to transition. And secondly, on the desired end state, where we want to be at the end of the transition. And today, I have to say, on both key questions, we are pretty clear. Science has never been clear about the problem, the seriousness of the issue. We are losing biodiversity, nature in general, nature services, and we are destabilizing climate at a frightening and dangerous rate. And I don't need to tell the audience here all the figures and statistics and reports that have been come out in the last several months, couple of years, highlighting that. So we are clear about the issue. The issue is serious. In fact, is beginning to have even an impact on societies and more specifically on economy. Then there is the issue of the desired end state and the climate. On climate, we are absolutely clear already for some time. We must be a carbon neutral society by 2050, by mid-century. Beginning to also be clear on what that means in terms of the other natural systems, the ocean, forests, biodiversity. And last week at UNGA, a couple of weeks ago rather, there've been a 75 heads of states coming together, signing a pledge for nature, where basically says we must halt and begin to reverse nature loss by 2030. So that's clear where we want to go. Now the focus, and this is to your question, needs to be shifting on the pathways, on the plan to actually actualize the transition. And this is, again, very clear. We know exactly what needs to be done. First of all, we need to protect more nature. And by the way, this is in line with the 30% target of the New Deal in the European Union. Protect more and better natural spaces. And secondly, and this is the trickiest part, but also the one with greatest opportunities, we need to begin to shift the key economic drivers of climate change and nature loss today towards sustainable practices, and particularly 6 key sectors. The energy sectors, of course, towards renewable, agriculture sector towards a natural and deforestation-free agriculture, the fishery sector around curbing overfishing, illegal and unreported unregulated fishing, and marine habitat destruction, the forestry sector, sustainable forestry, and the mining stroke infrastructure sector about avoiding impact on the remaining natural places and be carbon neutral as well. Mm-hmm. And all this can only happen if government, business, and investor financial institutions step up, align to this global vision of a carbon neutral, nature positive world, and align the financial flows in the direction of supporting this transition. And that's what I think the COVID-19 crisis creates an incredible opportunity to compress the otherwise maybe 10, 15 years time they would have had to shift all these finances in the right direction, compress that in perhaps a few years through the recovery plans that we are all discussing today. So, the picture is bleak, but the opportunity to change is in our hands today.
Great. And I think that, we would none of us would disagree with the opportunity you set out, Marco. But where do you, we know this, there's been a lot of chest beating from the reports from the IPCC and others about data. And it's like there's, doom ahead and trouble ahead, but we don't seem to shift the politics. And perhaps what COVID can do or potentially can do is either do the right thing as you're describing, and accelerate and accentuate the move, or because people don't have hand-to-mouth money, food, etc., the inequality and poverty is going to go sharply through the roof. Those are going to be trade-offs. So where do you see things moving positively in that context? And I suppose this is a controversial point on my part, I suppose it shouldn't be. Is there a gendered issue here as well?
So I think this is the tricky question that you're asking. But I think what we are seeing right now, first of all, is the realization of the problem, as I said earlier. And I think we never had that before. We frankly never had that before. And until you realize the problem, you can't even think about the solution. So I look at that as a major positive step forward. And things like the Green New Deal are a clear demonstration of how policy is beginning to set clear targets and commitments in the right direction. Now, the real challenge is, and the real question, perhaps, Mahendra, is, would the EU and the national European countries' recovery plans, would it be really future-proofed? Would it be really aligned with the Green Deal targets and all this transformation that we've just been discussing? That's going to be the absolute litmus test for politicians' courage, vision, and focus on implementation. And that's what I think we will see in the next few months in the lead up to the instruments that will be approved, talking about the European Union, in spring next year.
But do you see things evolving positively? Would you say that what we've done with the Green Deal here, the EU Recovery Project, as a signal in the right direction, or are there other areas where someone said this morning that perhaps we need to be less introverted and think of positive narratives and stories and experiences and experiments from outside the EU? What do you see as what we might be able to learn from elsewhere?
I think,
or is the shock so across the piece that no one really knows? It's rabbit in front of headlights.
Yeah, listen, are we doing enough? I think we're not doing enough, clearly, because all the indicators of the state of the planet, and by the way, indicators that affect our health, our society, our economy increasingly, are going in the wrong direction. But and now is the moment to prove that we translate our awareness into practice. Policy, there are a lot of developments, and I think those are very interesting, but it's not enough. We need to begin to move actual money, actual investment, incentives, shift subsidies from perverse to incentivizing a green economy. That's what needs to happen next, and that needs to be in the instruments and the plans for the recovery plan.
Absolutely, and it's a shame that Paul Canfin couldn't be with us. Actually, he was planned, and I would have posed that question to him, because earlier on in the morning session, we had a member of Parliament that was on the subcommittee for tax, and looking at the role that the Parliament can play, and the greater teeth it needs to have, the greater confidence, and the agility to move in a way that holds truth to holds kind of a sense of accountability, if you like. And so, but unfortunately, he's doing something really important. He's actually talking to the Parliament around the issues that are affecting Brexit, but also its impact on biodiversity and the Brexit deal. So he's excused for obvious reasons. I want to move to now Tim Brett. You are representing a household brand, Coca-Cola. You are the president, if you like, of Western Europe, of the company. Tell us, what have you learned from the crisis, and where do you go from now? And I just want to remind all of you, don't forget to use your virtual hand. You know where it is, well, those of you on Zoom. And as I said earlier on, those of you who are on a live stream, use #StateOfEU. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Dhanendra, and thank you for arranging such an interesting conversation today. What have we learned? Well, I guess some of what we've learned is obvious, and it's for all of us, but people in Europe have, the pandemic has had a profound effect on households right across Europe. And I think we should probably start by recognizing the physical and emotional cost that many people have been through. So let's just recognize that collectively before we start talking about what comes next. For us in our business, we see it impacting both in what people are buying and the way they're buying. A lot more people are buying products online, having them delivered to their home. Importantly for us, a lot of our customers have suffered greatly as hotel, restaurant, catering businesses have been closed down due to lockdowns, or what different countries call lockdown. Of course, it varies enormously across our continent. So there's been a lot of emotional and physical and financial impact for people. We've all learned that. But I think it's also taught us to pause and appreciate what is important to us as individuals and as companies. The Coke company, we have a mission to refresh the world and make a difference. And never before has that make a difference part of our mission and our purpose been more valid. So we are determined to make a difference. And that means that perhaps in a break from the past, we engage and embrace with what the EU Commission is aiming to do on recovery. We are determined to build back stronger. It always sounds a bit of a cliche, but
it does, doesn't it?
we think we know what that means, and it very much it actually fits in with some of the comments that Marco was raising about the way we engage with the natural world, the way we use our resources. In our case, a lot of that depends on the way we use agricultural products and the way we work with farming communities. We spend more than $4 billion a year on agricultural products from Europe. The way we treat water, it is by far our most important resource, and we are determined that we will put back more water than we take out in our manufacturing process. And of course, very topically at the moment, the way we work with packaging and packaging waste. So we can pick up on all those as the conversation goes on. But I guess what I would say is it's been terrible, the pandemic, for all of us. It's had a terrible impact on many households, and I feel for them. It's had impacts on businesses, and we are now focusing on the future and how we can build back better.
Indeed. And Tim, I suppose, I mean, this morning I was saying that, you know, it's the tech giants that are winning here. They've had the biggest rises in their returns in the past 6 months, and even more. And as we see a shift to consumption massively, just for a moment, just what are you hearing from the people, your consumers, if you like? You mentioned, you referenced it a little bit, but what is it what signals are you getting that can provide you with the kind of compass as to where you might need to shift?
Well, of course, they're slightly contrasting. We have to be careful here that they're not all saying the same thing. Consumers have different pressure points across Europe. And I think one of the tragedies of this pandemic is it has put greater stress on some communities that were already under stress. The divides in our societies have been made even stronger. So let's not for one moment pretend that everybody says the same thing. But we see some broad behavioral shifts. Again, I mentioned already the way people are shopping has changed dramatically, where they're shopping. People are restricted in how they live their lives socially, so that's also had an impact. But I think perhaps behind your question, Dharmendra, is what are people saying about society, and what are people saying about what's in products and the companies behind those products? And I think it's clear that most consumers, many consumers, want companies to be better. They want not only our environment to grow back better. People enjoyed, in an ironic way, the early days of lockdown when the air was cleaner and there was less litter and less traffic. I know I did, and I'm sure the same for many people on this call. So they want the economy to grow back better and companies to be better. And I can say on behalf of the Coca-Cola company that we know we need to be better. I think we've made good strides over many years, but we still have much more to do. And we've been using this time as a bit of a pause to look at how we build back better.
Thanks, Tim. And I will let you go in a moment. There's another question I want to ask you, but I think that better point, which it's almost like it's an umbrella term for so much that people might be feeling in terms of values, ethics, morality, authenticity, looking at, you know, the ecology and making sure that people are being treated fairly. There's equality, etc., and mixed in what better means. But if COVID is making us or enabling us to value nature more and its importance, should we put a price on it, Tim?
Yes, I think in the short answer, how we put a price on it, that's hard hard to find those metrics, and we're looking for them. But without doubt, we need to put a price on it. I mean, we all read the same headlines, and I'm sure held the same passion points that, depending on who we listen to, 25% of all plant or animal species are under threat. That is a definition of unsustainable. We need, all companies, all societies need to have a healthy planet. And again, it sounds so easy to say and hard to do. But for us, what does that mean? I've touched on some of it already, Dharmendra. We can come back to it if you like, but the way we treat water, making sure we're not using too much, the way we put water back into society, and we make sure that by putting the water back, the ecosystems of those areas can thrive, and we have hundreds of projects across the world working on that. And I should add, that's partly a reaction to getting it wrong decades ago. I think all companies should look at what they've got wrong as well, and we got that wrong in many geographies. So we're making sure we're looking after water well. And I've already referenced it. Packaging and packaging waste is probably the one on many people's minds at the moment. We use plastic. We also use aluminium, and we use glass, and in some restaurants and bars we use no packaging at all, because people get their products through the fountain machines or the gun machines that many people will be familiar with in bars. But it's important, therefore, that packaging gets treated right. And that starts with us. We need to make sure that 100% of all the packaging we use can be recycled. We're nearly there. In Europe now, it's 99 point something percent of our packaging is recyclable. We then need to make sure that we get it back. And we've made a global commitment that we will get back 100% of the packaging material we use. And that means setting up hugely expensive recovery systems in Europe, which we're doing. We're committed to doing that, and the EU Commission know that we're committed to doing that. And then importantly, it means we've got to reuse the materials. It's all very well getting product back and recycling it, but if we don't reuse that recycled material, we haven't really closed that loop. So we're also committed to reusing that material. So a lot we can talk about later on.
Absolutely, Tim, and thank you for that. Time is obviously of the essence. It's only an hour that we have, but do reflect on this. But also for those of you around here, what do you think about putting a price on nature? People said that you couldn't do carbon pricing. And now we're looking at carbon price, tax adjustments, border tax adjustments on carbon. Carbon pricing, when it was first discussed, people thought, oh my God, you couldn't do it. But is that something? And use your hands or use your chat box, your chats function to say what you think about whether we should put a price on nature. We'd really welcome your views. Before I turn to the matter of investment and money, because we've got Emma Navarro, Vice President of the European Investment Bank with us. Before I bring you in, Emma, if you may, let me just take a reaction from people to what they've heard so far, and people if they want to comment on what they've heard from both of our first two speakers. And as I said, virtual hand, and those of you on live stream, hashtag State of the EU. I have someone already. I have one of our Generation Y people, Jakub Ziental. Jakub, welcome.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
A short question regarding...
Firstly, introduce yourself and where you're from, then before you ask your question, or your contribution, or your idea.
All right. So my name is Jakub. I am from Poland and I live in Netherlands. I am very passionate about the European Union and civic engagement, generally empowering youth. And Tim mentioned something that actually sparked some idea, like generally you were talking about slow economic growth and the fact that we need to put nature into our economy. However, my question is, we are facing the second crisis, at least for my generation. This is the second crisis that we are facing. And the economic growth in Eurozone has been very sluggish in the last 5 to 7 years. Ever since Euro started facing some problems back in 2015, we didn't really have any strong economic growth. So how do you see a role of Western Europe in the world, and how it will influence, say, our generation? Because as far as I can see, everything looks very bleak.
Indeed, Jakub, and all the data points even worse in that direction in terms of joblessness, lack of opportunity, quite for some time, especially for your generation. What would you, just very briefly, if you can be very brief, what would you like to see happen? What do you want the politicians to do for you?
In my opinion, the best option would be to start investing directly into young people and economic enterprises, giving basically ideas like universal basic income, this sort of stuff, and giving money back to real economy instead of financial instruments. We live in complex society, but so far, the financial instruments have proven that they are not really affecting the real economy. This is also very visible in the States, where the stock market is still booming, but the unemployment is relatively high for US, and a lot of people are struggling constantly trying to get by. So I would invest in people instead of investing in big companies.
Well said, because I suppose one of the things is, I said this again and I'll repeat it, the recovery fund is the largest use of taxpayers' money to improve member state economies, but also the EU's zone, if you like, to be competitive, resilient in the future. But what experience has shown, especially from the financial recession, is that the money hasn't trickled down to where it needs to be. And this time, I think citizens won't be so forgiving, especially as this is much bigger, wider, deeper in its consequence on so many levels. Before I invite others, then let me bring in the institution, the European Investment Bank. It's it's a great pleasure to have you back, Emma. You've spoken here before. Tell us, from your point of view, and this is a tough one because you are, a significant institution. Mooted is going to be the new green bank, climate bank for Europe, etc. From your perspective, what can you do to ensure that there's an alignment with the Paris Agreement and private sector counterparts? You know, how do we shift the private sector in the right direction? I mean, obviously, Tim, you might argue, has absolutely, evidently, has seen this issue, and they are moving in that direction. But actually, numbers count, and actually, we need many more companies to move in that direction. Emma, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here with you in this very interesting panel. Well, of course, the private sector will be key in our efforts to make the transition to a low carbon and more climate resilient future possible. And without the private sector, we will not succeed, because we know that for this transition, we will need a lot of investments, and the bulk of the investments will need to come from the private sector. And well, in order to move the private sector, incentives are needed. And well, we have heard about the carbon prices to internalize well, this externality, that the climate change and global warming to internalize in prices. And we have other type of incentives. We have seen the Commission working on the sustainable finance package also to try to improve the transparency of what type of investments and what are the impact of those investments. And of course, in the case of the European Investment Bank, we can also support the private sector in this transition, and we can do that in different manners. First, we can help mobilize those investments that are needed for the decarbonization of our economies, and also to make our economies more climate resilient to those climate risks that we know that are coming. And in fact, we have a lot of experience in crowding in other investors. We have proven our deleveraging role with EFSI, the so-called Juncker plan. We also know that from moving away in order to move away from fossil fuels, we will need innovations, and we will need new technologies such as hydrogen or low carbon gases and many others. And access to finance for those innovative companies is not always easy. And for that, we can provide also risk mitigants that can make those investments more attractive to other investors. So we can leverage investment. And we can also help develop green products. For example, we were the first issuer of a green bond in the market, and those type of products help precisely to direct the investment towards those green investments. And second, we also have committed to not finance all those activities that are not consistent with the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement, activities that could harm those principles. And for example, last year we committed to stop financing energy projects depending on fossil fuels, including natural gas. And now we are working in a more comprehensive Paris alignment framework that will mean that we will need to stop financing some activities that are negative because of their impact on our goals. And we are also, for example, developing tools to screen the projects that we invest for physical risk. For example, imagine some infrastructure. So we are going to test whether those infrastructures are prepared to withstand a physical climate risk in the future, in order to engage early on with promoters to strengthen the resilience, the climate resilience of those projects. And also we can provide advisory support or technical assistance to the projects, which is key in the current context, where we know that there will be a lot of financing in the markets. And so we know that we need to make sure that the projects are the right ones and they are investable. And finally, we can also help increase awareness, and this is very important, awareness of the private sector regarding the risks and opportunities of climate change. For example, the risk of investing in some fossil fuel technologies will mean for the future, or the big opportunities that can come for some companies if they engage in this transition. And this is also something that we can help to do. We are collaborating with the Commission on some of the important sustainable finance initiatives, the taxonomy, and those other things that will help investors.
Emma, thank you for that. But tell me very briefly, if you can, because time again is of the essence. There's two elements for me here, based on what you said. That what role do you have to play in relation to national plans for climate change and energy, the transition, if you like, because you're going to be investing heavily in as a part of the recovery, if you like. Do you have the teeth to say no to parts of Eastern Europe that rely on fossil fuel and will have difficulties in a transition? Will you be able to do something about that? And secondly, I suppose, but I need to be brief. I know it's challenging, Emma. The second thing is, how do any of us respond to the young man who spoke earlier? Because actually, when you think of our slide from this morning, where we saw only 44% of the EU population think their life would matter in the context, the EU matters to their lives. When you think of that young man's experience and what he shared with us, we have to stop telling the same story to him and others if we're going to change their mind about the EU. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you. Well, yes, we want to be, and we are determined to be, a strategic partner of member states for the implementation of their energy and climate plans. And we have a lot of experience in precisely in investment and in sustainable investments. And for that, we are planning, for example, to strengthen our advisory support, because as you mentioned, there will be a lot of funding coming from Europe, also the Recovery Fund to many countries. But what we need is to make sure that those projects that will be invested would be the right ones and will be bankable, and also would be ready for investment also for other investors. And we can provide this technical assistance. In the case of Eastern Europe countries, they also need to make this transition, and there are also instruments available, European instruments, for their support. And in fact, we know that, and in fact, as we committed, we will not finance those projects that are not consistent with the Paris Agreement. This is a commitment that we have as the EU Climate Bank. But we, on the contrary, can help them to, and there are instruments, the Just Transition Mechanism with the Commission, also the recovery funds, another type of money, our advisory support, to direct and precisely choose the right investments to prepare them for the future.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps, all of you have a think about what we say to that young man from Poland, about what he shared with us. I want to bring in three people, but again, this is not, you are all participants equally in this, in terms of creating ideas and challenging each other and creating solutions. And this is not about speaker audience scenario. So please do contribute your ideas, use the chat function for some of the ideas about universal basic income. Do you want that? Do you think it should happen? Should we be pricing nature? Your views on that will be helpful. I'm going to move to Changhua, who's been patient, and I apologize in advance if I pronounced your name wrongly.
No, you got it correctly. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Welcome.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself and your question, or
sure.
contribution, or idea.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Changhua Wu. Actually, I'm supposed to be in Beijing, but I've been stuck in Washington, D.C. area in the last few months due to the pandemic. And so I work mostly in the climate change, energy, and the sustainability arena, mostly focused on China. I have one comment and one question. My comment is, I think this time around, getting into the third decade of the century, the most exciting part probably is the coming on board of the financial institutions there. And there's so much happening, around the financial institutions, their commitment from a risk and opportunity perspective, including disclosure and transparency there. So I'm very delighted, excited. That's the most exciting part for me, from my perspective. My question to Tim is a little bit more specific, and I'm encouraged to hear that 99% of Coca-Cola's, the bottling, plastic bottling already sort of moving towards this recyclable effort there. But globally, I think we are experiencing a major challenge because of the downturn of the economy. And so plastic packaging recycling facing tremendous challenge, particularly because of the cost of pricing issues there. I just out of curiosity, what's your view, even from your company and from your industrial perspective, how would you see the impact of the economic downturn on the, all the commitments made by some of the major brands already? Would that be any impact at all? And in terms of how we accelerate recycling or addressing the plastic waste issue?
Okay.
Or if there are impacts, what are the 3 major impacts you would see actually unfolding in the coming decade? Thank you.
Xianghua, thank you for your contribution. And you make an important point. I may not be able to get Tim to answer all of that, some of it possibly, but not all of that. But let's make sure that even he uses the chat function. But one of the things that occurs to me on the basis of what you've said, people said, that wind and renewables were really expensive to do, right? Everyone and their auntie was saying, oh my God, no. And then, look at us now, where we are, how cheap it is, but it actually needed political will and momentum behind it. Same thing must be the case with plastics and repackaging. I want to bring in a couple of our European young leaders. We have Camilla. Welcome. Introduce yourself again to the audience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Camilla Sultanov. I'm a public speaker and workforce diversity consultant here in Helsinki. When we talk about sustainable development goals, it's not only about climate, but it's also social sustainability. And I work with diversity inclusion by promoting this whole ESG and reporting. And the question is also relating to a previous question or order. So how does companies see the promises and commitments to SDG goals beyond climate change, but also SDG 8, 10, 11 on community, reducing inequalities, and really looking at, if we're looking at Europe, how do we balance the act that it's people who are needing behavior change to sustain the climate, to save the climate, but also create new jobs. So my question is to Tim, and see, is there a cooperation on sustainable development goals, and what is the social sustainability? How high is the social sustainability on your agenda? Thank you.
In your backyard, Camilla, have you seen companies pull together and do the right thing?
Well, yes, there is a huge focus. Finland is championing in circular economy and hosting these, big seminars and forums. But
sure, but our private sector CEOs, are they doing it?
Yes, there's the, how would I say? I mean, there's company like Fortum in mobility, championing mobility,
okay.
And all the promises. But my question is still continuing to 2 line of thoughts. Is it stakeholder capitalism, or are we still talking about maximizing shareholder value?
Excellent, well said. Thank you very much. And please hold on to that and share your thoughts too on what you think about that. I want to move to Lindsay, another one of our European young leaders. Hello.
Hi, it's lovely to be here, and thank you to our 2 speakers. So my name is Lindsay. I'm based in Paris. I'm a social entrepreneur, and I represent an organization called W4, which promotes girls and women's empowerment with a focus on technology. So Sustainable Development Goal 5B. I'm a little more pessimistic than Camilla. I have a question for you, Tim. I want to thank you, first of all, for being here today. And while it's heartening to hear about these, these laudable initiatives by Coca-Cola to, shift your practices to more responsible, sustainable practices in terms of the environment. You said while you were talking, we're trying our best in the sectors, we're trying our best, but we don't, we don't really have the metrics, or we're struggling with the metrics. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd like to pick up on that, because, when it comes to the metrics and this whole discussion we're having today now in this global crisis, and of an unprecedented crisis. These are discussions that we've been having arguably for decades. Actually, so an example, I just looked for an article that I read. It goes to show my age. In 2004, in The Economist, interestingly, Wood for the Trees, our company reports on their social and environmental impact any use. the point I'm trying to make is we've been having the discussions about metrics and alternative balance sheets for, we could say, arguably, you know, over 2 decades, even pushed by The Economist, which is surprising. And my question for you is, don't you think as such a powerful, influential company, Coca-Cola could be doing more to move us in that direction? Right now it's voluntary, so isn't it more a question of will, and maybe arguably you could be doing more?
Thank you. And I don't want to make this all about Tim and Coca-Cola. But I know absolutely the case that because it is, as I said, a global household brand. But there are also other private sector people in the audience. And I really welcome if those of you feel you're able to contribute too, but I will come back to Tim on some of that. I have Marie Ringler.
Yes, hello, hi.
Hello,
Marie
please
Ringler.
welcome. Introduce yourself. Where are you from? Sorry.
I'm based in Vienna, and I lead the work of Ashoka across Europe. Ashoka is the world's largest network for social entrepreneurs, and I'm delighted there's a few social entrepreneurs here in the audience today. That's wonderful. I actually want to bring in a sort of a slightly different perspective. And, you know, while I think we all agree that private companies and government have a huge role to play in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, I also see that there is a huge role for all of us, and, you know, all of us as citizens to be part of this movement. And I think it's, you know, we often, you know, it's easy to basically delegate responsibility, you know, to the big guys and say, you know, you go and please, you know, fix these problems for us. So I'm just, you know, wondering, you know, what are ways that big institutions, big corporations, you know, even big, you know, organizations like the WWF, you know, who have, you know, a huge potential to build on the momentum that was mentioned. How do we bring every one of us into this conversation, and how do we ensure that people have the skills to be part of that change that's needed?
Marie, that's good. I think most people would agree with you. But, you know, in all our lives, professionally and elsewhere, we're able to deconstruct and say what, but actually the how becomes difficult. Can I just push back to you in the most gentlest way? You are one of the largest, you know, global network of entrepreneurs. You have so much social capital and political capital behind your back. Imagine if you were to create something Europe-wide that says, right, change making Europe for recovery, and bringing all your entrepreneurs together in one space and say, let's go for it. How's that for an idea? Can you do that?
We're actually in the process of doing it. Thank you for bringing it up.
Good.
And there's been a number of initiatives, both in the space of climate change, but also other key issues where, you know, social entrepreneurs in our network are coming together to jointly address these pressing issues. But I do think that there's two things here. One is, how do we make sure that social entrepreneurs, with all they know, their systemic, you know, innovative ideas, can be more effective and scale their solutions. But there's also a question of all of us, right, contributing to this larger change, and essentially us as societies rethinking who shares the responsibility for a world that, you know, is better than the one that we're seeing now.
No, indeed, absolutely. And there's something about, one of the things that we've pushed out as a think tank is about the notion of power sharing and the notion of creating a different social contract in the modern 21st century. Part of that has to be about what you're talking about, that actually, how do we craft a new social contract? But part of that is not only bringing your entrepreneurs together in Europe, but how do you actually speak truth to power by making sure the European Council, European Commission, Parliament interacts directly with that group of entrepreneurs to create a different dialogue and a different narrative about who holds the responsibility for change, and not simply be moored by, I'm a politician, I'm accountable, I need to do the right thing. And sort of, we need to kind of shift all of that. But share your thoughts on that on the chat. I might be way off beam, you never know. I want to go to on our live stream. We have someone from our Twitter, from our live stream. Charlotte, you have someone who has been desperate to get in. Share. Welcome, yes, Charlotte.
Indeed. Hello, everybody. Indeed, Amandra, we have a question on Twitter that is quite short, but maybe difficult to answer. Is pricing nature the only way to preserve nature? So quite short and snappy, but happy to hear your thoughts.
Excellent question. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And I want to kind of do a quick fire return. Those of you who want to respond to anything you've heard, please do raise your hand, because, you know, there's that thing about pricing, but also if we need to adopt a different economic model and a sense of different economic aspects around what underpins economic growth, do we fundamentally need to rewrite GDP? And what does that mean? What does that involve? So I'm not going to ask you to answer that question, Marco, straight away, don't worry. But I would like you to reflect on, I know you're happy with that. Marco, what I'd find helpful, what we would find helpful is that given what you do, who have you seen in the private sector step up and step in on this agenda?
A lot of companies, There is a new coalition called Business for Nature that is bringing together hundreds and hundreds of companies trying to develop science-based targets for nature alongside science-based targets for climate. And so we are seeing a lot of goodwill, definitely in the last 20 years, perhaps even 10 years. There's a massive growth in understanding in the corporate sector, particularly at the CEO level, that business sustainability and profitability is depending on a stable environment. And this is, you know, what is here in this report in my screen, Nature in All Goals. Nature is the foundation for everything else. If we destroy the planet, there won't be no equitable, no just, no safe, no healthy future for us. But Mahendra, if I may, this pricing thing on nature, this is something we're very passionate about in WWF.
Okay.
The Twitter comment was spot on, because it's not just about putting a price on nature that we save nature. Before that, there needs to be a cultural step, which is about valuing nature and understanding fully the contribution of nature to our society, to our well-being, to our economy. That's really the first step. And as I said earlier, we're getting there, and we need to step up now the translation of that awareness. But let me also say that a price on nature is a fundamental step at this point. It's not the only approach, but it's definitely an approach that is missing. And it is about two things. It is about both putting a price in terms of taxing and penalizing the activities that are destroying nature, destabilizing climate. And by the way, nature and climate together, they're part of the same ecological challenge. It's not just climate, it's not just nature, they are together. So let's please refer to climate and nature all the time. So on one hand, we need to put a tax on carbon, perhaps even a tax on non-recyclable single-use plastic and other things that are today impacting the environment. But also putting a price on nature, it's also about incentivizing and mobilizing resources to incentivize good practices, and that driving the shift that we were mentioning before. So not just about taxing, it's actually perhaps even more important about incentivizing the good activities. And there was a comment, I think, from Vin Shan, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, which is spot on. The other important thing is that any tax, any price put on any of these negative, harmful activities should be earmarked, and they need to be going exactly incentivizing a shift, a green shift in those same sectors.
Marco, and I want you to be brief in this. You talked about the fact that there's a lot of political goodwill. We heard from Lindsay that some of this discussion has been going on for decades, you know, and then we heard from one of our other European young leaders, Camilla, saying, are we talking about stakeholder capitalism, or are we still talking about shareholder capitalism? Have you, very briefly, are you seeing a shift in the private sector that looks at a green and an equal bottom line rather than just the red line?
I do, but it's not enough, that's for sure. And I think back to Lindsay's point, if you look at 20 years ago, we were much, much behind. We are much ahead today, but we are still not at the scale and the acceleration that we need.
Okay, so something needs to shift. And clearly, obviously, this might already be happening, but it feels like some sort of working group, task force, commission on pricing nature needs to come out of this conference. And if it's already happening, let us know. But clearly some wise heads, which include not only the usual suspects in that conversation. I want to, Emma, just very briefly, you clearly made reference, Emma Navarro, you made reference to how, in a way, the way in which you're investing is incentivizing, but also creating a standard for what you find acceptable. Just respond to some of this in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the private sector behavior.
Yes, well, I think the private sector is also starting to move slowly, but moving. And we now see that there are more and more companies that are integrating more sustainability standards in their approaches to investment. And also, for example, the United Nations launched the Sustainable Banking Principles, and well, our partners, the intermediaries, many banks across the world joined this initiative. So they are moving slowly, but moving in this direction. And I want also to, because I saw in the chat one question on how Europe is well addressing biodiversity. In our case, we also screen our projects to take into account the biodiversity impact, to make sure that there is no net loss of that biodiversity, that we can comply with the most important standards in this field. And we also try to screen those projects and comply with those standards. And also we finance natural capitals with different funds, also the reutilization of soil and different other initiatives that have an impact on nature. I think that biodiversity and nature are sometimes more difficult projects for investment. We try to also get the support of some programs that the Commission has on this regard, but of course we need also to direct financing to those areas.
Indeed, absolutely. It's good to, I mean, absolutely it's good to hear. But I think in terms of where we find ourselves and the fact that when you recognize the depth of the problem we're in and its breadth and its kind of longevity, especially in terms of public finance and debt, there's a sense of urgency missing and pace. And perhaps, you know, we haven't got time for principles actually anymore. We actually need action that's measurable and time bound, and we don't have very long. But that's not for you to respond to. I'm just generally, you know, what your views, those of you, because actually, if you see another set of principles, aren't you just going to say, really already, again? Given what you're seeing around you in the world, in the streets, and everywhere, we need to move beyond principles and actually see measurable, tangible action. But I'm not asking you to respond to that, Emma. I'm going to go to, we have Coco Warner here from the IPCC. I say that with surprise. I don't mean to, Coco.
Oh.
Very warm welcome. It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see everyone. Thank you.
So, please introduce yourself. I've just done that kind of lovey thing over the screen. I ought to introduce yourself to everybody so everyone knows who you are.
Yes, hi everyone, and thanks. This has been a really high quality start of the week. My name is Coco Warner. My day job is at the UN Climate Secretariat, so the UNFCCC, which supports the climate negotiations. And then occasionally my night job is serving as lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's where we first met the Friends of Europe. So nice to be here. Should I ask my question?
Please do, or make a contribution. What do you think? You've been churning out these reports and you must be thinking, oh my goodness, really? When do we see further action? What would you, I mean, given that you're, you know, there is this churning out of data, and you know, one of the funniest things about the crisis is that every politician says we're following the science until it becomes politically unviable and suddenly becomes political. And you don't see the science being followed at all. We've seen that across the globe. What would you like to see happen? So that's before your question, if you like.
Thanks. What would I like to see happen? Well, in the IPCC special report on land and climate change, indeed, that report looked at all of the scientific literature and put together a big picture of how climate change and land use, how we use our land to produce food, where we live, the forests that grow on land, how all of that comes together. And it came very clear that there are huge opportunities ahead. And exactly as you just said, the real question is, what are the series of legislative changes that need to happen in countries? And it's almost what's a pathway to a regulatory move or a pathway to legislation? So what would need to happen, and I think you were just talking about this, is legislation that incentivizes a shift from exploitative activities that degrade soils, that drive biodiversity loss, to incentives that help systems like agriculture, forestry, regenerate soils, shift agricultural production to systems that are regenerative. So that's what we need, and the question is how and where is it happening? So I would come with a question: where do we see examples, either in a European Green Deal or Green New Deal? I can't remember if the new is in there. Do we see examples where countries are moving from, thank you, from what we should do to actually saying, no, we're actually going to put this into our national policy, we're planning it, we're financing that. And that's what I've come to hear and learn today.
Yeah, and it would have been great, not only if Paul were here, but I'm not sure if you've got any European Commission staff here who can answer that question. What we know from our own experience, and perhaps, you know, Emma wants to come in on this point, our experience from running these events, and you've been at some of them, is that the national plans, when they were first submitted, were woefully lacking in specificity and movement in that direction. I don't know what the second round of assessment has demonstrated, but we did have a colleague in from the DG Klima on 2 weeks ago who said, you know, there is movement, but you weren't able to get to the point of actually, if you were to have a dashboard, who are the ones that are moving in the right direction? And do we have a momentum that's going in that direction? I didn't get a sense of that. Perhaps those of you who are, if you are from the European Commission, or we can post it back to the European Commission, let us know and answer directly to the question that you've asked. And thank you very much for being here and responding to my challenge. And I'm now going to move to, I've got 5 or 3 minutes left now, and I'm going to say this, it's the Coca-Cola moment. Tim, if you forgive me, we need to move to that beverage that refreshes us. It's hugely sweet, even though it's zero. No, I'm joking with you. Just to kind of create a bit of levity, because there are a lot of questions in your ballpark. Be good to hear what you have to say on the number of things that have been said about, can you do better and more? Can you measure, can you show that measurably? And that other point about peer pressure, you know, one of the things about change, we know it from childhood to adulthood. Peer pressure has a huge impact. How do you bring other, you know, CEOs on this gravy trail? Because we know that that matters. So take them in whichever order, and forgive me for making fun of Coca-Cola. Off to you.
I don't mind at all, but thank you. I'm glad you know the brand. That's the start, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me just try and answer some of the questions that came up, and I promise to do this really quickly. Changhua, you asked a question: do we see, as a result of COVID, a decreasing of investment on sustainability initiatives? The short answer is no. In fact, I know for a fact that in next year's plans, we're spending more on sustainability than we did in this year, and this year we spent more last year, etc., etc. And I believe that's true not only of Coca-Cola, but of the whole drinks industry. So I hope that's a reassuring answer. Camilla, you had a lot of questions about social sustainability and the SDG commitments. Yes, I agree with you that they are also critically important. I think when we look back at this year, we've seen a significant change in the space of 6 months, or maybe 9 months now. When we look back to Davos and what were the key topics in Davos, it was much more around environment and making sure we do the right thing. It's swung dramatically, obviously, during COVID to more society, because the need perhaps arguably was more urgent. And it's important for us as companies and us as a society to make sure that we get the balance right, and that we have the right level of investment and focus behind all those SDG commitments. Lindsay, you had lots of questions. I'm not sure we have time to answer them all, and I would be delighted to get in contact with you, maybe through Friends of Europe, and they can connect us. And
great, the connections happened. Let's do that. Go on, sorry, Tim. Just carry on.
The comment particularly started about measurement metrics and putting a price on nature. And I think we already heard a little bit of this answer through Marco. The problem is combining all the metrics. We can put a science-based target on climate and a metric on climate through carbon emissions that we will be held accountable to. And we sign up for that, 25% reduction. But then we'll start getting into the broader areas of water sustainability, how we're using agriculture, how we're using our packaging. It's difficult to find a common metric that everybody is using. And what we are doing together with WWF and Natural Capital and the protocol behind Natural Capital, the Business for Nature Coalitions, which is 360 companies, is trying to make sure we have data points that you can hold us accountable to that are common across an industry as a whole. So there's not necessarily a shortage of metrics. It's getting everybody to sign up to the same metric and making sure that it covers both climate and nature. So no lack of will, no lack of teamwork and collaboration across the industry, but we're not there yet on having a common set that you can hold us all accountable for. I'm again happy to pick up on that and to put you in touch with people who probably know more about it than me, because it's climate, it's packaging, it's agriculture, and it's water for us. And I probably missed somebody out who asked questions. I apologize if I did, but again, please get in contact with me through Friends of Europe, and I admit that I, as well as somebody from my team who probably knows more, will get back to you.
But Tim, you didn't answer my question, which is really terrible of you.
Well, seeing as you started off by making fun of Coke, that's why.
I know, of course. No, tell me, who out there in terms of, the brothers and sisters, that there's very few sisters in the CEO camp, but how many of your brothers and sort of sisters are following the bandwagon of actually let's do better and differently and introducing a different kind of shareholder model?
Slow progress. Firstly, I would say there's a lot more sisters now than there used to be, but not enough. And I agree with you on that. So there are some, but they're not enough. And we are working on that as a company. In fact, Coke is very proud of the fact that we are the first major American company to have a female board member, and it goes right back to 1934. We still, though, don't have 50% of our board being female, and we don't have 50% of our leaders. So I know that wasn't the topic of your comment, but I think it's still an important one that I don't just let go. We are striving to get to 50% of all our leaders being female, and we're doing well. We're currently in the 40s, so but more to do. In terms of industries, I won't start naming companies, but I can name alliances. The Business for Nature Coalition, that's 360 companies who are committed to doing more. I work with the soft drink industry across Europe, and I would say all of the member companies of the soft drink industry across Europe are committed to doing more. I also work with the food and beverage associations right across Europe, and I would say all are looking to do more. So it's too easy to say that companies aren't doing enough. I think it's true, but it's too easy because often the sentence ends there. I think the sentence should be companies are not doing enough, but in most cases they're looking to do more. And I'm not sure that answers your question or not.
It's okay. No, that's fine. But we can continue that conversation. You have to, in part, and obviously you're not going to name and share, but I just want to know whether the peer pressure was having an effect, because we've all been there. There's been alliances, networks, and people say the right thing. Action follows, or if doesn't really follow. And by that, I mean measurable, impactful action. And I think that's the name of the game. Go on.
Maybe I can add then the investment community plays a role here. And I think a company like Coke can take the lead and is taking the lead of explaining to the investment community what we're doing, why we're doing it, the investments behind some of those goals we spoke about. And then I think the investment community will start to hold big companies, hold them to account and measure them against each other. And I'm proud of the progress we've made there, but still not satisfied. We need to do more.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I have to draw this to a close. We've sadly run out of time. An hour goes so quickly, and we've got so much more to discuss. But we've got the chat function, but also other ways and connection, make the connection with each other. One of the things that it occurs to me that when listening to you, Tim, but also others, don't forget that in the past 6 months, we've seen the biggest underwriting of the private sector in history. So in effect, the public sector taxes have been actually underpinning the private sector in a way we've never seen. It's wholesale. And we're going to see more of that. And we're going to see more taxpayers' money being used for the recovery of both member states and others, again, the private sector. So there's something about a clarion call for a different kind of social contract, which means different things about the relationships between citizen, state, civil society, and community. And we need to think about that changing very differently. We have some good ideas, like the one that Tonu's just put up, put a price on nature. What do you think about that? Shall we build on that? Is there something that you guys want to work on? We didn't say a lot about GDP and how do we create a different model of GDP? Who's interested in that? Is anyone working on that? Perhaps I'm naive and, just don't know. But, is there a need for putting some thinking on it rather than just talking about it? We have those brilliant ideas about actually the civil society coming together in different ways. And I hope change makers, you can you can link with some of the people in this room, in this global virtual room, to actually think about that different resetting of engagement between entrepreneurs, civil society, government, and civil servants. What we do know is time is running out, and I've run out of time too. But I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been stimulating, thought-provoking. We've helped you to think about the right issues, make the connections, and debate what change looks like. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're in. We're in the business of identifying potential solutions, ideas for what we need to do. I know they're tough and hard, and actually nothing's terribly new. It's mostly politics around it that wraps it and moves it in the right direction or not. But perhaps there's a divine coming together of necessity and adversity that brings together all of this. But one final point, and I know I said I was going to end ages ago. We must not lose sight of the fact that those who are on the poor end of the spectrum, those who suffered inequality before COVID, are in for a shocking ride, and it's not a pleasant one. And how do we make sure that that is not shrouded in fine words, but we fundamentally think differently about inequality, poverty, and those who are going to shift in that direction, given where we find ourselves today. Thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure to engage with you. I hope you found it interesting, as I said, and keep tuned. We have another session coming up. Those of you who are able to join us, we have another session at 4 o'clock, which is our citizens grilling mayors on cities of the future. So this is where we bring in that local dimension, which we're committed to, is about localism. So where we get that, where will the new normal for European cities be? And then we have a session at 5:15 about what young Europeans want the EU to do. And we have that well-known journalist, academic, Timothy Garton-Ash, who's done a lot of work on that to help you think that through and share his thoughts, which will also be very interesting. Followed by, and this is a bumper day, I have to say, how do we pay for social protection at 5:30, where we have a number of speakers, including Nicola Schmidt, Mary Robinson, and Dominic Micheladu, to engage with you about how do we pay for social protection. Thank you. That's enough from me. Take care. And if you don't come to the next sessions, please do join us again tomorrow. Make sure you link on Zoom. You know what it is. It's #State of Europe. And see you again. Take care and good to engage with you. Bye-bye.